reclaiming of beauty is absolutely fundamental to what a better future looks like for us all. If we start to use the idea of beauty and understand it properly and seriously, I suppose, that it's foundational to all life, then we have an opportunity of a very different way of being in this world. But it is a fundamental part of reconnecting us to ourselves and to each other and to the natural world, to our souls. It's soulful. Beauty is our homecoming. It's what we come home to.
Welcome back and welcome here if this is your first time. It is wonderful to share this adventure with you. Thank you for being part of this. We have postponed the start of the beautiful leadership immersion, so don't worry, you still have this week to join, with the final doors closing on the 26th of September before our opening ceremony, and we get really deep into it. We have had people joining over the last week, and so we're using this time until doors close to really introduce ourselves and to start some of the groundwork. But for those of you that are just finding out about it now or have been sitting on the edge, not sure if this is the right thing for you or the right time for you, you can still join and you would be so welcome. Remember, you don't have to be a leader in the traditional sense to be part of this beautiful leadership program, because it's more about leading yourself and leading from the beauty of your soul so that you can create more beauty in this world and weave your part in this great tapestry of life. The start of the program is all about setting up rituals and practices that will support you through the process, as well as understanding where you're at and how you might turn the insights that you have into action. If we aren't really going to do that, or at least begin that process in 2020 with everything that's brought up in our lives, then when will we do it? It's a now or never type of scenario. It feels like the time for waiting, procrastinating, pushing it till a better time in your life is like over now. And we really just have this call to show up and live in alignment and live with intentionality and really be part of co-creating the world that we want to live in. The core themes that we explore during the beautiful leadership immersion are redefining leadership and worth, shadows, trauma and liberation, sacred activism and decolonization, embodiment and biohacking, vision, intuition and edge walking, creativity, cultural futurism and flow consciousness, collaboration and community. It's this intertwined weave of inner transformation with systemic change. We explore how to really listen and find our call to action in perhaps the softer, more integrated ways. We adventure into how to see beauty and find the possibility in the space that we find ourselves in, within the context of our own story. We have guest teacher appearances from Uma Dinsmore-Tooley, Tiu Dehan, Swati Martin, Sienna Sherman, Sally Kempton, Nina Simons, Jyoti, Anna-Greta Folderbach, and Alan Moore. And there will be some others that come in and make little appearances like surprise sprinkles that will delight you throughout the experience. You can find out more by going to the courses page on our website, which is www.thefutureisbeautiful.co.co. I also have 2 spaces left for my one-to-one presence leadership mentoring, which goes alongside the immersion so that you can have support in really anchoring the shifts, clearing trauma patterns and limiting beliefs, and awakening your gifts. This can be done on its own or integrated in with the immersion. I've kind of designed the immersion to be something that gives more context to the one-to-one work. And for the one-to-one mentoring, enrollment will close when those places are filled, because I only work with a limited number of people in the one-to-one way at any one time, so I can give my full attention. In terms of dates, we'll be doing the first sessions next week, the week of the 21st of September, so it'd be good to get everyone kind of grounded into the process before then. I know that many of us need to stay connected to possibility over these autumn-winter months. We offer sliding scale pricing and exchanges for the immersions that nobody's turned away. You are a leader, and we need you aligned, inspired, and committed to the beautiful in yourself and in this world. My guest today is a man who knows beauty, Alan Moore. In the dedication to his book, Do Design, Why Beauty is the Key to Everything, he dedicates it to all the people who have designed and created beauty in this world, for those striving to bring beauty into this world, for those who will create beauty and share it with the world. I love this dedication, and I know it's each one of you. This is a time of soul where we must not forget the importance of beauty, but instead be led by it. For it's beauty that sustains us when we need it the most, and it's beauty which enlivens our spirits, makes us feel, and reminds us why we are here. It allows us to transcend and to see beyond. And beauty connects us. It brings out that which is soul quality within us. Alan Moore is a business innovator. His life mission is to make every business on this planet as beautiful as they possibly can be. He does this by changing the way people think about the world and how their businesses can succeed by being beautiful in every way, by consciously designing better products, services, and experiences, by creating cultures of learning internally, as well as creating entirely new concepts of what a business or an industry could be. Beautiful businesses are proven to be attractive to employees, buyers, and investors. A beautiful business is a profitable business. Alan believes that beautiful businesses are, in fact, our future. Alan has designed and created everything from books to businesses, working on 6 different continents. He's worked with artists such as Anselm Kiefer and Helen Chadwick, shared his knowledge in the form of board and advisory positions. He's worked with many companies, including PayPal, Microsoft, and Interface. He has run learning experiences for leadership teams, as well as teaching in institutions as wide-ranging as MIT and Ringling College of Art and Design, Sloan School of Management, and INSEAD. He has been involved in advising pioneering entrepreneurial companies, some voted in the top 50 most innovative. Alan's unique creative capacity to work alongside companies who need his skills and knowledge helps them transform what they do and how they translate that into commercial success. Described as lovingly disruptive, Alan offers his clients a viable creative vision of what their businesses can become, whilst keeping them honest and true to core values. The author of 4 books, including his international bestsellers No Straight Lines, Making Sense of Our Nonlinear World in 2011, and Do Design, Why Beauty is the Key to Everything, 2016. Alan has spoken at the inspirational not-for-profit Ideas Festival, the Do Lectures, at South by Southwest and at the Hay Literary Festival. Alan still works as an artist. He tries every day to lead a life as beautifully as he possibly can. In this conversation called Weavers of the Beautiful Future, we explore the themes of beautiful business, regeneration, and wholesome leadership as we contemplate the question, what future would we create if we reclaimed the language of beauty? I hope this episode moves you to a place of inspiration, wonder, and of course, action to create more beauty in this world.
Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. I am delighted to welcome you, Alan, to The Future is Beautiful. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today.
And our friend Ed Gillespie, who's been on the show, said that you had to come and talk about beauty. And it feels like the perfect timing that we're here having this conversation today. It's interesting to me how when you talk about beauty, it probably comes across very differently to when I talk about beauty, just because of the bodies that we're in. And me coming from like a fashion, albeit sustainable fashion background, but the word beauty then has like slightly different connotations. And yet I really enjoyed, as I've looked through your work, the framing of this word, and especially the notion of beauty as a verb. Can you tell us about that?
The idea is that by moving it into a sort of an action word with intention, it's something that we do beauty. In the book, actually, I've got this little bit where I talk about the philosophy of ing, I-N-G, because whether you're weaving, stitching, coding, baking, writing, walking, all of those things, all of these practices are things that we can imbue with beautiful thoughts and intentions and outcomes. And in a sense, it's a sort of it's an invitation for people. The beauty is not something to be observed, but something which actually is and can be practiced in a multiplicity of ways. And I think also it kind of sticks perhaps with people a little deeper inside of them about this possibility of doing beauty. And for me, I suppose also it says to people that it is a word that we need to embrace and reclaim. And it can be part, as I said, in the macro and the micro parts of everything that we do.
Where do we need to reclaim it from?
Well, there's two parts that I suppose is you can open a book, you can open a newspaper, a magazine, or you'll be listening to people speak and they will use the word beauty, interestingly enough. And in a way, they never unpack the beauty bit. There's always an assumption that there's a sort of inherent truth. That person has a beautiful mind, or that was a beautifully written piece of prose, or whatever. On the other hand, we're not allowed to use beauty in the context of business or in architecture or all of those sorts of things, because in a sense, it's mysterious. We can't put our finger on it. And in this highly rational world, we aren't allowed to use the word beauty in that context. And so, for example, I met a lovely lady called Alison Brooks, who's an architect. She runs the Alison Brooks Architects in London, highly awarded RIBA architect. And I went to see her a few years ago after the book came out. She'd invited me to go and spend some time with her. And she said, I want to thank you because your book gave me the courage and the inspiration to want to write and talk about beauty and architecture, because we're not allowed to do that. Mm. And yet when we look at buildings, we describe them as beautiful. I mean, I live in Cambridge. We have a lot of tourism here because people like to come and look at the beautiful buildings. That reclaiming of beauty is absolutely fundamental to what a better future looks like for us all. If we think about it in the context of, say, obviously this is all in flux now, but workplace cultures or organizational cultures, why can't we say what we want to create is a beautiful culture? And then if we start to unpack that, that means that we're using words like empathy and compassion and generosity. We're using words which are filled with optimism, have a healing context to them. And in a way, it's a fundamental reframing of how we see the world and how we are in the world. And back to the sort of the doing, the ing, the verb, is that as a kind of practice would really change what it is that we bring into the world and how we behave as individuals in the world. And that is part of the reclaiming of the word beauty. And what I have discovered, because when we can talk about this a bit later, but the word beauty wasn't something that I kind of picked up because I thought it was a sort of a catchy thing to do. It comes from a very sort of deep, place within me. what has happened since writing the book and working with this idea of beauty is that it really speaks to people at a fundamentally different level. It's out of their heads, it's into their bodies, and people really lean forward. There's almost a yearning for beauty. If people feel that you're authentically turning up to work with that idea and that framing, they want more of it. And that has come through the workshops that I've done or the speaking that I've done, or people just being in touch because they've read the book and have invited a conversation because they feel it is a kind of fundamental part of a more beautiful future, to frame it like that.
And do you feel like the reason that the notion and the action and the living experience of beauty invites us in so much, is that to do with it connecting to more of a quality of soul?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's our homecoming. Beauty is our homecoming. It's what we come home to. To your point, I agree that I feel it's something that I suppose I've pondered on and become increasingly more convinced of, that it is a fundamental part of reconnecting us to ourselves and to each other and to the natural world, to our souls. It's soulful. As I said, you can't think beauty. It doesn't work like that. It drops right down into the body, and it's operating on a whole variety of different levels all at the same time. And we are all soulful and spiritual creatures. That put religion to one side or whatever, we all have a spiritual appetite. The world that we have created has really starved that soul. And so our work is not soulful. It's highly material. And we as a species, I think, have suffered greatly as a consequence of that disconnection. If we start to use the idea of beauty and understand it properly and seriously, I suppose, that it's foundational to all life, then we have an opportunity of a very different way of being in this world.
Yes, I love that. I love that calling that the very notion of beauty just invites us into. It is that place of truth, of what's sort of behind the stories and the shoulds and the, oh, it's always like that, it's always been done like this, or it kind of takes us into like that space of reimagination and honoring of that which is sacred and that which is possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you touched on a very important point there. I've finished reading Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And I have to say, I've read a lot of books in my life. That really touched me. The eloquence of her thinking and her writing is really quite exceptional. And I think the bit that kind of caught me as you were speaking there was this idea about reimagining and reimagination, and that actually the root word of beauty is regeneration. In her book, she really asks us to reimagine ourselves in the world by honoring everything that is the natural world, and really describes, I think, with such precision about how we've really kind of in a way fallen out of nature, the consequences and the damage it does, not just the natural environment, but to us, because the reality is we are nature. And there's this great bit in the book where she says, what would we do if we knew that the earth loved us back? She kind of makes me feel quite emotional when I say it. And in a sense, the kind of that deep root then is also that thing about nurture and caring and responsibility. And that in a sense, all of those words, the empathy, the compassion, the generosity, the honoring, the caring, some people might look at those as saying, yeah, but they're cheap words, they're easy words. Do you know what? They're the hardest words. They're the hard, acts of compassion, to lead with generosity, to really hold people with grace and yourself and the world requires superhuman courage and capacity. And I've become really convinced about that. That's part of that reclaiming and the reimagining. And then we can use lots of rewords in rebuilding and restoring, rebalancing, because I think we are out of balance. Well, and in a sense, what we've just gone through shows us quite how out of balance we are. And I've always believed that we needed to collectively as a humanity look into the abyss and for it to show us just quite how bad the world could be. That combined with George Floyd, you could never write this as a script. If you wrote it as a Hollywood movie, people would say, it's just not possible, it's not even believable. And I think those things are really asking us to do all the rework and the honouring and the caring, and that we have to really care for each other, which is hard work.
Can you explain how beauty comes from regeneration, what that relationship is through the roots?
The regeneration story is that all the laws of the universe are said to be beautiful. Einstein's theory of relativity, Paul Dirac's theory, which was actually how atomic particles will dance with each other over vast distances, called string theory. And there was a guy called Frank Wilczek, who was a Nobel Prize winning scientist, wrote a book called The Most Beautiful Question in the World. And the most beautiful question in the world is the world a work of art? Because at a level of physics and the studies of the universe, they are all said to be beautiful in their design. So that's a kind of super macro as well as a micro kind of storytelling, which is something I write about in the book. And if you look at the Earth as an organism, it is designed to regenerate itself. It doesn't take all of the resources to the point of extinction. It manages all of those things in this super ecosystem. Everyone talks about it. Some people agree with it. But to me, therefore, when we go out into the natural world, pretty much most of us, I think, in an untainted piece of nature, you know, whether it's me walking in the fen or walking in Snowdonia in Wales, or even sitting in a park in London, you would say that's beautiful because it's talking to you at a sort of fundamental level, and our DNA recognizes that idea of fertility and richness and growth. And so for me, that idea of reconnecting beauty to regeneration, and there are a number of people now which are writing about and thinking about this idea of regeneration, which must take us beyond. So I think beauty takes us beyond sustainability. There's lots of issues, I think, facing sustainability in terms of a language and a framework, which is difficult. I'm completely signed up for it, but I think actually we need to have a better description. For me, beauty and regeneration is a universal language that we can speak and we can use, rather than this idea that we're trying to sustain things, because we don't want to sustain things as they are. Somebody once said to me, what can the language of beauty give the sustainability movement? And then he folded his arms and thought he was being very clever. And I said to him, right, so the way I'd respond to that is I'm a musician, and I play the guitar, and I can play what is called a sustaining note. I said, but I can't sustain that note forever. And at some point I have to stop. And I said, whereas beauty talks about joy, and it talks about wonder, and it talks about regeneration. It talks about things which actually offer us something much more complex and richer, and doesn't, in a sense, have a moral loading to it. And I think that we have to become fantastic storytellers. You know, part of our job is to tell the best story we possibly can in a way which I think Robin has done with her book. She's told an incredibly complex but beautiful story in a very eloquent way that we can all understand. And she's showing us a world which is one that we can live in if we embrace it. And that, to me, are all the reasons why I think beauty is connected to regeneration.
Oh, there's so much there that is so rich and layered. And that, to me, in essence, is what beauty is. it is able to hold and weave all these layers of our complexity. Yeah, I actually wrote to Robin just last week to invite her to come and share some of that story, because yeah, it's really quite very special what she's created with braiding sweetgrass.
Yeah, she's a great speaker as well. She's got a very eloquent way of speaking. So I hope she says yes, because I think your audience would really appreciate what she has to say.
Yeah, for sure. And as you were speaking about the challenges of this time, I feel that the invitation of beauty invites us in to be fully present to the challenges and with the challenges, and moving away from sustaining. I mean, I was working in the sustainability movements like 10 years ago, and we knew it was an imperfect word then. But I guess sometimes that these words and this language brings people into a certain consciousness, and then we keep journeying through, and the invitation can get wider and deeper as we're able to understand more about the world that we're living in and what we are creating. For me, one of the things that feels so important about a beautiful future or a beautiful world, or allowing ourselves to do beauty, as you say, to bring that into the world, is it is acknowledging that within that framework there it's not like positivity, it's not perfection, it's really like an understanding of the full spectrum, the whole story and journey of how something has come to be in the way that it is, and that invitation into like the wonder and the curiosity, the sparks of aliveness that we all contain within us.
The word that comes to mind or emerges as you were speaking is wholesome and whole. And beauty invites us, your word, to be whole, as in WHOLE, just to make sure there's no confusion there. And that integralness, I think, again, is very important. And of course, I suppose that obviously really speaks to us as human beings. When we're in moments of really being present, we are also in a form of sort of transcendence. And we can only transcend when we're whole. We can't transcend when we're in bits. And I think that is a great offering. That is a great invitation for people to say, look, in a way, it's almost like back to what Alison, the architect, was saying about, modernism has got a lot to answer for because of the rationalization of architecture, to the point where we can't even use the word beauty, or in art, you can't use the word beauty. Of course, that in a sense has got there's all sorts of political and cultural reasons for that. But the reality is in a sense, therefore, we are breaking ourselves by not using that word or that terminology, or, getting back into using it. And the other thing I thought came to me as you were speaking was, for me, a really important clarification, because obviously we have spectrums, right? So we've got night and day, black and white, up and down, north and south. So people would say, what is the opposite of beauty? It must be ugly. And I say, no, it's not, because actually there can be beauty in ugliness. The world around us, nature can produce some pretty ugly, events herself. So what is the opposite of beauty? Because there has to be one. And I'd say it's tyranny, and it's hate, and it's judgment of others, in which you take actions in which you will use power to harm those individuals or that group or that place. And that is the opposite of beauty to me. Ugly is not the right word at all.
That's one of the ways that the word beauty has become misconstrued within culture, to represent something very outer rather than something very whole and full and dynamic.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think for a lot of people, spiritually, they are moaning in ennui. They really starved of that spirituality, and they're looking for ways in which they can reconnect to it but they can't find the path. The wonderful thing about it is, however, is it doesn't come loaded with an ideology, and it doesn't come loaded with a political sense or an economic sense or whatever. It's something actually when we do stand in it or understand it or want to spend time thinking about it, we really start to see it has really kind of life enhancing qualities and properties which would be beneficial. How could I respond to the world in a way that would be more graceful is a question I would ask of myself. How could I respond to the world where I'm not in judgment? Sometimes when I'm working with people, this is when we sort of get into the bit about using empathy as leadership. I tell them a story about a Tibetan monk who runs a children's home, who deals with a very, very naughty girl called Tashi. Really what I'm talking about is Tashi's never been shown love. She was abandoned as a child, and she's very naughty because she's angry and she's lashing out at anything and everyone. And I sort of explained that the monk could do all sorts of things to Tashi. He could banish her, he could punish her, he could shout at her, he could put rules down. And what he does is he talks to her and holds her with incredible compassion and love. Over time, helps her to understand that she can be part of a loving community and it's okay. And then to these adults, I say, so my request for you is at some point during today, I want you to spend an hour where you do not judge anything, neither yourself or anybody else. And I said, that will be a huge challenge for you to spend only 1 hour not in judgment. And yet, when we do that, when we do judge, we suffer. And we make others suffer through our judging. And so, in a sense, that work, really tough work to do, I can tell you, that's a work in progress for me, for sure. But it's something I'm mindful of. That would be a way in which, again, we can bring beauty into the world through our own capacity to perhaps move through the world with a little bit more grace and less judgment. And of course, there's a lot of judging going on at the moment, sadly.
Yeah, well, it's something that we do when we're in fear. There is a lot of fear now, but just in general in our culture, because our culture hasn't been caring for the beautiful aspects of our being.
No, in a way, it's been built in denial of it. I mean, if you think about our entire economy, and many years ago, I worked in advertising and marketing and all the rest of it, but really everything is built on FOMO, fear of missing out, or fear. You've got to buy all of those cleaning products because there are all of these nasty bacteria in your home. And if I don't have those genes, I won't look as attractive. Or if I don't have that car, I won't look as successful. If I don't, and it's all about pushing the fear button. And the media is also designed to work on fear. That's the way they make their money.
And a kind of snarky judgment, like, well, I'm better than you, or like looking down on others, and rather than like lifting each other up.
Yeah. And if you look at currently what's going on at the moment, again, I mean, with the whole sort of refugee thing, and I've tried to explain to people, I said, look, if you're living in a city which is being rained down with barrel bombs and missiles and sniper fire, and the hospitals are being bombed, which is actually the worst, it's the biggest act of terror, that there is no sanctuary whatsoever. You don't reluctantly leave your homeland. You don't reluctantly, I said to people, so what you're telling me is if Cambridge was under massive siege like Aleppo was, you would be happy to stay. You wouldn't be the one walking, halfway across Europe and some to find sanctuary. And for the media to use that as a form of judgment, that they're almost like some tsunami of immigrants, these people would think of nothing better than being in their local cafe with their mates in their community, drinking their local, teas, coffees, whatever it is, eating the food that is relevant to their culture. I can't understand why people can't see that. I mean, we're going a bit further down the track here, but the fear button is being pushed all the time. And of course, it's being used politically, not just in England, but of course in countries all over the world. The sad thing is I think that in a few years down the road, as population starts to decline, as they predict it may well be, people will be begging for people to come and work in their countries because there won't be the populations to do it. I just think beauty is a fundamental love of humanity, and we have to love people as fellow citizens of this world. And if people need sanctuary, then we have to give it to them. You never know, one day it might be us that might want sanctuary. Will we be the ones that are being judged and corralled? As an Englishman, watching what happened with the Windrush scandal, all those people brought from the colonies over to England to run the buses, to run the hospitals, to do all of those sorts of things, to be treated as they have done for some kind of weird political aim because we're being overwhelmed by immigration, which is a complete lie. I just think is, very, very sad to see that people can do that to other people. That was hard.
Yeah, absolutely. We can get so disconnected, and the way in which the media and politics can portray humanity can really take us into a place that is so far away from our own actual nature as human beings. The stories of refugees, of immigrants, even immigrants that have come to this country or any other country that haven't had such an awful passage, have not had an easy story. It's not easy to pick up and go somewhere else where you don't really speak the language, you don't understand the nuances of the culture, you're being judged all the time. And yet it is remarkable how this manipulation has happened of our very humanity to a point where it can be commonplace for people to sit around having, I wish they'd just go home kind of conversations about people that are in need. And that speaks less of the people, the individuals that are partaking in those conversations, but more of an entire system and culture that has been systematically robbing people of their connection to beauty to a point where that can be a way of seeing our fellow brothers and sisters.
Yeah. For the United Kingdom, at the very least, we've never really reconciled ourselves to our colonial past. We still have a colonial system for a lot of people, or a minority of people, but it's a powerful tool that they can use. We dehumanize, we objectify people and human beings into nouns as opposed to verbs. They become its. That's why I think it is very important to see that we have to be able to bring that beauty and that loving speech back into what we do. I can't remember the name of the lady that said this, but she says, words create worlds. One of the things I do, again, if I'm working with a group, say a business group, I ask them, what is the language of beauty? I just ask them that question. It's a really simple question. What is the language of beauty? I want you to write down on a single post-it note a word that you would associate with beauty. And then I'd like you to write down on another set of post-it notes those words which you would disassociate with being beautiful. And then I ask them to say, and what is the language you use in your business today? And what is the language you would choose to use if you had a business that you really, really wanted to work in tomorrow? That is a really simple, but it's a very powerful exercise for people, because they suddenly realize that the language that they use on a day-to-day basis is actually a form of mask. It creates myopia, even creates huge blind spots where they can't see that actually the way that they're speaking, the language that they're using is actually creating a culture and behavior towards each other and to the outside world, which is really limiting the potential of what that business or that culture could be. It's a profound moment for a lot of people. That reclaiming, I think, is absolutely about the reclaiming of the language that we choose to use and how people choose to use it. Unfortunately, I don't think the Daily Mail will be listening to this podcast, but, you know, guys, if you are, and those like you, perhaps using a bit of loving speech and thoughts in your newspaper might not be such a bad thing.
Yes, and I don't think they are listening. One of the barriers that I have contemplated is how the name "The Future is Beautiful" has acted as a wall that has meant many people have not listened to the podcast that might actually enjoy the conversations because of these kind of preconceived notions of what beauty is or who beauty's for. It's been an interesting journey just to kind of like hold this name over these years. And in a way, it's interesting because I feel like then a lot of my conditioning as a woman sort of comes up around that. And I feel like it gets judged in a certain way. And I know it's true as well, because I've bumped into people that I've known from working in politics and other aspects of sustainability and social business. And then I've said, oh, I'm doing this podcast. And then they've said, oh yeah, I've seen that, but that's not for me. And I'm like, well, this is what we discuss on it. And they're like, oh, well, I didn't know it was like that. And I've been like, oh, well, that's interesting. Where did all that judgment come through, that beauty would not be for certain people and would be for others in the context of the future is beautiful? And it's interesting because this project started, it was called Think, Act, Vote. And the first edition of the book that we released in 2012 was called The Future We Choose, which was never quite the title that I wanted, but we were doing it collaboratively and someone else really in the team really wanted that. And I was like, cool. And then a few years later, decided to relaunch the book. And I was going to call it Creating the Future, which is much more kind of, I guess, inviting to everyone, right? It's sort of a bit blander.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I went to meet a friend of mine, Andy Gibson, who's the founder of Mind Apples and is, you know, very much in the world of like social enterprise and knows me like very, very well. And he just looked at me and said, why don't you call it what you want to call it? And I was like, what do I want to call it? And he said, the future is beautiful. And I was like, could I? Like, you know, almost like at the moment I was hearing that, like, really? Like, am I allowed to say that? Am I allowed to hold that invitation? And this was before I had seen like Charles Eisenstein's work and The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. I hadn't experienced the word beautiful in this kind of context. And when he said it, it was like, well, of course, that completely speaks to the multidimensionality of what it is that I am inviting in those that come through the book or what was going to then become a podcast. I'm curious as to if you have had that or what your experience has been, because obviously I know you do a lot of work in business and with corporate environments of holding that word beauty and initiating people that have perhaps been separated from that notion of their own beauty. Yeah, I would love to hear that experience.
I'll start actually to your question with why I chose the word beauty, because it's actually very important to answering your question. So I kind of was in a place of deep crises, and I'd had a nervous breakdown, which in some respects was quite spectacular. And I really felt I was a very long way from home. I'd sort of become this sort of, you know, what was I? I'd done many, many things in my life. I'd always say I was a creative engine, but somehow I was, you know, working for organizations and people where the only thing that was of interest to them was how much money they were going to make, and it destroying me. And so I asked myself, what would be the thing that would take me home to me? And I sat with that question for quite a long time in a very agitated state, you might say. And then one day a memory came to me. I was 7. I was on a beach in Cornwall. It was a family holiday. My mum was always a very stressed, anxious woman, partly because she was always someone that suffered, I think, from anxiety. We never really knew, but her behaviour kind of indicated that she quite clearly did. And then on top of that, just worried about how she put food on the table and all those kinds of mother things that mothers do. My father was there. I mean, he was just the kindest, most beautiful, gentle man I ever knew. And I loved him deeply. With my brother and my sister, sometimes siblings don't get on, as you know, but the family unit was in harmony and happy. I was on this beach playing with my toys, the sun was out, whatever. What I realized, and you think, I mean, that memory was like, what, 40 years old. I realized I was at one with myself. I was at one with the ones I loved the most, and I was at one with the natural world. And the only word that could describe that integral sense was beauty. And that's why I chose to use the word, why beauty is key to everything in the book. So it comes from a very deep place within me. And I decided that that's what I wanted to really commit myself to. So fast forward from that and the writing of the book and then working with organizations. And there was a big company I was working for at the beginning of last year. And it was for their 70 divisional heads. And I was invited to sort of spend an evening with the company the night before over dinner and over drinks. A gentleman comes up to me and he says, "So I hear you're going to be running a day for us tomorrow." And I said, "I am." He said, "Great. So what are you going to be doing with us?" I said, "We're going to be looking at how your businesses could be more beautiful." And you could tell by the look on his face, he wasn't particularly impressed by this answer.
Yeah. He's like, and we're paying how much for this?
Yeah, I know. And I quite enjoyed it, actually, because it kind of just gave me that little extra kind of, kick, which is like, you really got to kind of take this home tomorrow and make it great for them. And also because I'm confident in the work because I really believe in it, hence the sort of the lead up to this story. And also then based on, the many, many years of experience I've had working in and for businesses in a variety of different ways. So I'm really confident in my material. And what I suppose I've also learned to do is to weave a very powerful story for people. I've got to take people into a place which initially seems a really weird place to go. Why are you asking me to shut my eyes and now pretend I'm in a spaceship doing whatever it is I'm doing? But from that place, you are really talking to the individual in the room. Each and every individual is. So the important thing is to connect the weave between the kind of framing that person and their sense of themselves, then also within the organization and how that organization works. You slowly move through that where you're explaining how beauty then manifests itself and manifests itself in everything that they do, both in terms of their individual responsibility as leaders and then as makers of the world. And that's just taken a lot of hard work and practice to kind of put that together as a package that is profound for people. Well, there were two parts of the story I think are worth telling. There was one point a lady stood up in front of the entire company and she said, "I really think we should be making products and services that we would want to sell to our friends and our families." And I thought that was good. And at the very end of the day, the gentleman who showed his skepticism towards me the night before, he comes up to me and he says, "Do you mind if I sit with you?" And I said, "Please be my guest." He said, "Well," so he sits down, he looks at me and he says, "I'd like to apologize." And I'd say, "Well, what for?" He said, "Because I didn't believe that you would bring anything of value to the day. And so I want to apologize for that." He said, "Because you exceeded all my expectations." So I said, "Well, if you're honest, they were very low in the first place. So I didn't have to try that hard." But he said, "No, seriously," he said, "you, by what the lady said and various other things, you've really profoundly shifted our lens, both in terms of our responsibility as a business in this world, but also actually how we think about ourselves internally and how we work." And that was a gift. To me, that's the gift. That's the gift. That's why I do it. I feel I'm in service to this work, because if I can do that type of thing, And if I can help people, then that's good work. Iris Murdoch, she talked about beauty is about bringing the good into the world, again, as a universal truth. And I think that the artfulness, I suppose, is to do it in a way where you're not moralizing and you're not preaching. What you're doing is you walk alongside people. And so I do this other thing, which is I call walk with me. But in many ways, it really is an ethos, a philosophy, a practice where I want to be a walking guide for you, to be able to point at something and for you to see it as I see it, as best as I can show you, and to help you maybe frame yourself and the business of what you're doing, and seeing actually that there is more potential in making things which are beautiful than there is if you're only interested in material gain at the expense of either people or the resources of the planet that we use on a daily basis. And it's back to that honouring that we talked about at the beginning of our conversation. It's so important. So there's a sort of, trying to sort of, weave, replumb, reconnect, for people to say, it doesn't have to be like that in this world. Our world doesn't have to be framed by anger. It doesn't need to be framed by winner takes all, profit at all at any cost, until it costs you everything, until it costs you the earth. But as I say, it's not enough just to say those words. We've got to walk alongside people and to show them a more beautiful future. And in fact, actually, I am jealous of Charles Eisenstein's title for his book, because I think it's such a great title. It's such a wonderful invitation for people to reclaim that for themselves, which they are due.
Hello. We're taking a short pause from the conversation. On behalf of our team and our community, thank you for being here and co-creating The Future is Beautiful. Much dedication, love, and time goes into the production of this show. We believe in being advertising free in a world that's always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And so we make this show with you and for you, thanks to your support. There are 3 ways you can be more involved, so we can share the vision, wisdom, and creativity here as we explore what it means to be a human in this time. You can support the podcast by sharing it with your friends, posting episodes on social media, and doing iTunes reviews. You can support as a patron by making a monthly or one-off donation of your choice. And with this, you join the Global Patrons group and monthly video calls where we share connection and insight. You get to know the other amazing patrons from around the world, their stories and their work, and you offer direct support to me and the team, as well as being brought into the behind the scenes of creating something like this. It sounds like a lot, but it's as much or as little as you want to get involved in. You can become a member of Presence, our membership collective of care and practice, where we explore how to embody the themes of the podcast with workshops, calls, special events, tree whispers, and powerful tools, practices, and rituals that you can bring into your life. This is open to absolutely everybody as we create an inclusive and diverse space that celebrates well-being as a human right, where we explore together what it means to be creative, courageous, and connected to ourselves, each other, and the earth. This is about embodying sacred activism. We love meeting patrons and Presence members, and how being part in this way weaves our lives together, as well as making this show possible. If anything from this conversation has moved or inspired you, please get more involved. All information can be found at www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community. This show really can't go on without your patronage and Presence membership, so please do make it happen. And now, back to the conversation. Thank you so much for sharing some of your personal initiation. When actually Charles was the first guest on this podcast, and I made a joke and I was like, can we share the word beauty? Beautiful. And we had a good laugh about it. Yeah, there's something in that the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, that each one of us does have that knowing, no matter how disconnected we've become from it. And hearing your story and also, the work that you do in companies and in business where we can sometimes create this sort of separation away from the human when it comes to business. And then it's like, well, this is just how it is. I wonder, from the time that you've spent doing this beautiful work that you're doing, is it like an initiation that people need to go through of some sort, like a breakdown or a complete dissolution somehow of the ways that we've culturally come to see how things should be done, especially in a kind of business framing? Or is it something that maybe for some it needed to be more dramatic to lead the way? And are we now stepping into a time where some of us have gone very, very deep into our journeys and consciousness is maybe shifting to a place where a more gentle nudge can open that space because of where we are at collectively?
I don't think there's an either or to any of those questions. I think, in a sense, I would say all of those things are true. I mean, the Walk With Me thing, for example, is something I offer up as a one-on-one thing, very personal, and people will always come with an agenda. For me, it's an invitation. You come for a walk and we walk. It's a very powerful container as a practice. People come because there's a need. Let's just put it that way. Maybe there's a sense of, I want to go in a new direction, but I don't quite know what that is. I think there is a growing realization. I mean, even if you look at, say, the Financial Times, I mean, I think the shift in their editorial policy and what they write about over the last 24 months has been significant. They really understand, for example, and to me, that's a bellwether of, we can't afford to go business as usual. We have to have a fundamental re-engineering and redesign of how we think about our economies at a fundamental scale. Otherwise, we won't be reading pink papers for much longer, or e-papers for that matter. That all is dynamic at the moment. You know, lots of people working in organizations really suffer from stress and disenchantment, but they're stuck because they've got mortgages to pay and rent to pay and mouths to feed and all those sorts of things. But it's not enriching their lives. All of that is in play. And I think also, obviously, what we've been through this last year is a massive shift. That said, there is a cohort and a generation which really wants a better world. If you look at, say, Extinction Rebellion, people might see that as a form of activism, but what they're saying is, we want a better world and we can't afford just to wait for you to continue doing what you're doing. There are businesses out there which are really showing their pioneering leadership in terms of their businesses. I mean, I've done a sort of study. I've spent 5 years looking at lots of businesses which I would describe as beautiful. I look at their purpose, business models, how they think about how they grow, the quality of their products, the honouring, the caring. All of those things are aspects of that I would sort of look at. And they're not all the same size because, you know, nature, again, doesn't grow like that. We need to have a really big discussion of, what does scale mean and what does growth mean in this world if we were to make it beautiful? Because if we were meant to just grow forever, we would all be 150 feet tall or something, and then we just don't work that way. That's the big conversation that, in a sense, business needs to have, which is, there are some businesses that really deserve scale because they bring something to what the world needs. So in the new book I've written, it's called How to Make a Lead a Business the World Needs. Not what shareholders needs, but what the world needs. And my belief is that over the next 5 years, definitely in the decade, we will move from talking about businesses as being sustainable to businesses that are regenerative. So if you look at, say, the tiling manufacturer Interface, which is a Fortune 500 company that went from being a very unsustainable business, manufacturing lots of stuff which was unrecyclable, to now actually saying that it's now gone beyond sustainability and its mission is to become a fully regenerative business by 2025, right through its entire supply chain. It shows you that it is possible to do that. If you look at Patagonia, everyone talks about Patagonia, but there was a great interview I listened to with Yves recently, where he said about how he really thinks about growth, and that you just can't grow 25% year in, year out. That's the destructive kind of model that we're in, right? So some years maybe you grow by 20%, but other years you only grow by 2%. It shouldn't really matter. If you run a garden, there are some days when, the apple tree does really, really well. And there are some years when the apple tree doesn't produce as much fruit. And we should be able to accommodate and adjust to those sorts of things and aspects. Sorry, it's slightly off the point to the partly the question you were raising, but it felt important to talk about those things. And actually, I think there is enough information out there. It just, and that in a sense, partly what I've been doing is curating and pulling that knowledge together so I can really show people in reality what this could or should look like, to help them think about their design of their future, or to think about their role in leadership, or what their business models look like.
Yeah, thank you for bringing in this question about scale, because I find one of the things that I find really disappointing is, as somebody that, I've worked in sustainability and in sustainable fashion and kind of in this sort of this corporate social responsibility aspect, and also creating businesses based on values and beauty. Like, I'm invested in this as a possibility of how we create our beautiful future. I find myself quite often disappointed by what companies will then do. And so a recent example is Oatly, which is the oat milk company that has become the absolute favorite between people that are not drinking dairy milk, because they have mastered like consistency and taste. And many of my friends that don't want to consume milk because of the way that it's produced and the sustainability, we're like, how do they do it like that? All trying to make our oat milk at home and not quite getting that consistency. But then feeling like, okay, Oatly's a great company and we can support them. And then they've just gone and sold part of their business to Blackstone, who are associated with Trump, who are most likely contributing to deforestation in the Amazon. And then you're like, is it not possible to scale and stay clean? And we have so many different examples of these brands that were, and I don't know like the whole stories of what's happened, but for example, the Body Shop sold to L'Oreal and Pucker Teas sold. And why, when something scales, it seems to be this something that happens that takes it away from those original principles. I hope that there's some really great examples that aren't like that, but I find myself continually heartbroken.
Yes, they have huge concentrations of power through money. I mean, I was thinking actually, like, again, when I was listening to Yves, I mean, I still think they retain 100% control of the company. So he is master and commander of his ship. And I think Vija also own 100% of their own business, the two founders, which I've looked at. It's impressed me because I think of the deep commitment to that business, which has taken them a decade to get to that, in a sense. And there was something that I came across just recently, the SIG hedge, I think it's a hedge fund called Storebrand, based in Norway, which has got a fund of about £69.9 billion. But they've just divested all of their ownership in mining and fossil fuels. And they've said, I'm sorry, but we can't have you lobbying against climate change, because actually you're destroying the planet and you're not really doing anything so there's some really big significant statements. The fact of investments into ESGs, companies that are really signing up to ESGs. There's quite a lot going on. It may not be entirely obvious to lots of people, and there will be some people which, they just want to take the money and they want to run. I've got a friend of mine working on a business which really people should be throwing millions at it because it could replace the entire industry of MDF. Now, I'm sure people who are listening into the show that were CEOs of MDF factories would not thank me for what I've just said.
I'm not sure they're listening to this show.
But just in case. But what my friend can produce with his factory is a material board for building that comes from cellulose waste, could be manufactured into a very, very strong board, as good at, if not better than MDF, fully recyclable. And trying to get that to work within an existing paradigm is frustrating. In fact, we had a long conversation this morning about it. And I feel like just standing outside sometimes and having a good scream because it is frustrating. But there is quite a lot going on. What we do have, I mean, one of the things I've always said, and I've said it for well over 15 years, is no one gives up their power willingly. If you have a monopoly or if you have power at something, no one ever comes up and says, look, take all my power. Have it. And of course, it's addictive. Shakespeare wrote about it. So what we're seeing, I think, is a titanic kind of shift of plates that are going on. If we think about the cultural values that are going on, the material discussions that were happening and where money resides. And of course, in some respects, what we're seeing is there are those in the world that would prefer to consolidate even greater power over countries, economies, people than they already have. And it's our job, it's our beautiful job to resist that desire. There's a lady called Carlota Perez, and she wrote a book called Technological Revolution and Financial Capital. And she talks about cycles of innovation and industrialization and money. When you get to the end of a sort of an industrial cycle, what happens is that there is great resistance to that which is going to come and replace it. And it's at that moment, it's the Battle of Helm's Deep, Tolkien-esque, its size and its scale and its ferocity, because it realizes that it has no future. And what it does is it uses all its power to stop the change. And I think if I'm being optimistic about it, and I think we have to be optimistic, we have to have hope in our hearts for a better world and a better future. We will say this is the time when we really have to put all our hearts and energies into defeating that which is resisting the better world that wants to emerge. But it won't go without a bloody fight. And I think we can see that politically at the moment, unfortunately for a lot of us, we've got leaders which are not representing the best interests of their people because they've sold a lie on fear. But actually, they've sold that lie so they can be more powerful. They can have the leadership. And actually, what are they doing with it? They squander it. It is almost Shakespearean in its nature to watch it unfolding at the moment. And yet people will still cling to that belief, which is why your work, my work, and the work of others that you have on this show is so important, because they are all invested 100% in bringing that better world into reality. And it needs as many of us as we can possibly get to make that happen.
Thank you for that. And that leads into this notion of beautiful leadership. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think it comes back to a whole bunch of things to me, which is, are you going to be a good ancestor? What is the legacy that you are going to leave behind? So we need to start thinking back in generational terms, not just in my lifetime. What is the work that I'm going to leave upon which others will benefit from? And that kind of links into, obviously, purpose is a very popular word these days. And of course, I always like to be a little bit difficult. So I use the word mattering. Does it matter? Does it matter to me? Does it matter to the world? Does it matter to my team? Does it matter? What are we going to bring into this world that matters, that really is going to create some value and benefit? That, to me, in part, is real leadership. With that, in terms of vision, is things like How do I lead with generosity? How do I lead with compassion? How do I lead with empathy? How can I create a container in which this organizational group can work, where we have high standards, we quest for quality in everything that we produce. We need to be in a constant process of iteration and feedback. But how can we do that in a way which is actually helping everybody thrive and everybody grow? And to me, that is part of beautiful leadership. I was again challenged by somebody about what beauty could give to leadership. Again, we had arms folded. I've caught you now. How would you apply it today? He said to me. I said, right. So I said, let's have a scenario. I said, there's a big company. It's worth billions. There's a big board meeting taking place. The reason why this emergency board meeting has been called is because the company is in financial difficulty, or the projections are that unless it starts to sell more of what it makes, they won't be meeting their growth targets. So this is all a manufactured narrative, if you think about it. Anyway, the discussion starts to move towards this idea, but what if we lied about the fact that the emissions from our diesel cars don't pollute the atmosphere in the way that they really do? And what if we lied about the fact that actually diesel engines are higher performance than petrol ones? So they could see that actually doing that would really be a great sales tool to sell more vehicles. But of course, there are some risks involved with that. Like if we get found out, there could be class actions against the company. Actually, there could be criminal actions against the company. It could torpedo the trust in the business. It goes on and on and on. But what if I said to this guy, somebody on that boardroom put his hand up or her hand up and said, is that the most beautiful decision we could make? And the guy looked at me and I said, I don't need to explain myself anymore, do I? I said, because what is unpacking in your head and in your heart is personal responsibility, personal accountability, ethics. Are we bringing the good into the world? It's giving you now, there's an expansion chamber going on inside you where you are now understanding the full ramifications of the choices you could be making. That's one of the things that I freely offer to people is before you make that decision, ask yourself, is that the most beautiful decision I could make? And go and live with that for a while. And maybe we would get to wiser decisions which have better outcomes as a consequence of that. You know, there's a great quote which is something about the bitterness of the eventual outcome. It always lasts longer than the sweetness of the shortcut taken for the wrong reasons.
Powerful. I think we've all taken the shortcuts.
Yeah,
and that question, that I can feel how it works in a professional context, but it also is very powerful around relationships.
Totally.
And your relationship with yourself, how you're choosing to respond to something.
Yeah. And I think it's back to that idea that it works on multiple levels all at the same time. In a sense, that's why it's so much more powerful as a language, as a philosophy, as a verb. The doing of beautiful leadership, we kind of just discussed in a sense, means that we're really using our full capacity as human beings to operate all the time, rather than the idea that this is a rational decision we have to make, which has got nothing to do with the soul or ethics or our sense of ourselves in the world. You know, how much more powerful could we be? It's got so much potential to it. And the other thing about it is because it's regenerative, it's infinite. So surely we want to really think about that we create that would last for us an eternity, rather than that we would create has a very short lifespan and ends up in landfill. And that is also something very important for people to connect to.
As you were speaking, and the word power, the notion of regeneration, of the regenerative, infinite quality of our beauty, I felt this sort of flash of what's possible when we're really coming from that place within, because it is infinite. It does connect us to that which is bigger than the body, the name, the story, the economic bracket, all of this stuff that we get so defined by in this world. The more that each one of us is connected to that beauty within, is freely giving that beauty into the world, it just excites me and delights me of what is possible and what could be possible very quickly, actually.
Yes, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think that it's so important in this new work that I've been working on, but to the leadership bit, it's about, so the first thing you have to do is about the work on you, to your point. So if we have a team and people aren't in good places, they're not connected, so you've got to make sure that spiritually you're in the right place, that you are healthy, you're doing things which are, you're working on your own self and your own potential, because that's only you can do that work. Nobody else can do that work for you. Because actually then when you come together to work collectively on whatever it is may be, you just bring so much more potential as a group by the fact that you've done those things. And as you know, people do a lot of meditating or whatever, you really shut and you really go somewhere. I mean, your interior is this vast landscape. It's as big as the cosmos in many respects. And it's a terrain that only you or I or whoever can traverse. No one else can traverse that terrain ever. That's yours. That's your sovereign land. And so therefore, if you thought about it as a garden, then it needs to be tended and it needs to be loved. I was listening to someone speak just the other day about one of the key sufferings for a lot of people is actually they don't think that they are enough. And that so much then personal behavior is it comes from that place of, I'm not enough.
Absolutely.
And so therefore, beautiful leadership is that work of saying, I am enough, and I do deserve happiness, and I do deserve an enriched life, and I do deserve to share that collectively with other individuals and to share that joy, because it is possible. I suppose because of the journey, and it's, in a way, the breakdown, as much as it was devastating, is a gift to me. I now see it as a gift because it allowed me to see things which I never would have been able to see before in my life. And to really understand that when somebody else says that they're suffering, you understand just how profound that might be. And then to use your empathy to try and help and heal as best you can. And if you think that, all of those people are walking into organizations every day to work and they're suffering, surely beautiful leadership should be a way of actually being able to nurture those souls and those people in a way which is going to be healing for them and joyful. Or, looking at it from just a personal practice. It's something that you have something really beautiful to give to the world. We each have a unique voice and a unique gift, whatever that is. And that, to me, is very important to communicate to people.
Yes. Big yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alan, for your time today and for this rich exploration.
Thank you. I really I enjoyed it. I love the fact it was completely unplanned, unstructured, a roam in the Garden of Beauty, perhaps we might say.
Yes, we walked together in the garden.
We did walk together. That was absolutely what we did.
Can you share how people can get in touch with you and the ways in which they can explore further with you?
The website is very simple, beautiful.business. That's it, www.beautiful.business. My email is alan@beautiful.business. Go to the website, email me. I'm very happy to chat and talk about the work. So I offer this one-on-one program called Walk With Me. I run bespoke mentoring programs for people or organizations, businesses, founders, CEOs, leaders. I can run immersive learning programs for organizations. So, because it's not like you can kind of sort of, I don't know, wave a stick and say that, that's beauty and we've done that, tick the box, let's move on. I mean, I think it's demanding and it's more immersive work. And that can kind of then be framed in terms of, a learning journey for that business where we can agree on what the outcomes would look like and what the inputs would be. We are also working on a school idea, which is just in the early days of the planning at the moment. Something that we should talk about, I think, for sure. All of the stuff is on the website. I welcome people to, if they're curious, to get in touch if they would like to talk some more.
Wonderful. And I'm sure many will be taking up that invitation. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mentioned in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?